The Australian property market's under intense pressure. They're severely undersupplied, creating a shortage of dwellings for people to buy and also for people to rent. But the federal government's come out with a policy of building 1 million homes over the next 5 years. That sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Really? First of all, it's not realistic. Number two, there's no meat to the bones at the moment. It's all theory. And number three, it really is unlikely to work. And in this week's Property Insider chat with Dr. Andrew Wilson, I'm going to explain exactly why that is. So if you want to keep up to date with what's happening in our property markets, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and click the little bell icon so we can update you each time a new show comes out. Look anywhere in Australia and you'll see a housing market under intense pressure. Now that makes the federal government's goal of building 1 million homes over a 5-year period under its new housing accord, it makes it sound like welcome relief, doesn't it? But is it really? We know our property markets are severely undersupplied, so any initiative to increase supply are welcome. But it seems this policy hasn't really been thought through. Even the budget documents the 1 million dwellings as an aspirational target, and the federal government itself has only locked into an extra 10,000 homes, and these won't even start until 2024. So to better understand what's been promised and what's more realistic, I'm looking forward to my chat this week with Dr. Andrew Wilson, Chief Economist of My Housing Market and Australia's leading housing economist, so we can get some insights into what all this means for our property markets. Hi, Andrew.
Good day, Michael. And it's almost predictable what came out of the budget. I do think, with all due respect, that the aspirational target to build 1 million homes in that 5-year period up to the end of the decade is just paying lip service to what is a terrible problem in our country, a problem that's been evolving now for quite some time. And you do get to the point, the critical point, where really you can't do anything about it. And we are unfortunately uniquely positioned where we are basically crowding around our seashores in our 5 big capitals, a couple of smaller regional areas, but it is all about living in those big cities of Australia, and we've just run out of capacity to extend them either outwards or upwards. And it's not just the geographical constraints that are there, it's also the web of barriers that we've created to new development. We've had a culture, an anti-development culture in this country that's become pervasive, and we don't have to look back too far to see those actions by banks to restrict lending to investors and developers back in 2015-16, which was cheered on, and the catalyst was APRA for that, because they were telling us that interest rates were going to go higher, so we had danger from having too much development, too many investors. Of course, they were dead wrong there, just as the RBA was dead wrong, and just as the Treasury was dead wrong about the trajectory of interest rates. But what it's done is it's just shut off the pipeline to development. Underlying trends for new capital city development are still 25% plus lower at the moment, and that's the year-on-year monthly data, still 25% lower than the peak that was reached back in 2015-16. And the real collapse has been in higher density apartment development. We had a surge last year courtesy of Home Builder for houses. And look at trouble that's got us into, Michael. We don't have enough labour and materials to satisfy that, and that's pushing inflation through the roof. So it's just a mess at the moment. And aspirational targets aren't going to get us anywhere, let me tell you.
Well, let's see what the government initially did propose in the budget. Treasurer Jim Chalmers explained he was looking to encourage the big banks, Commonwealth Bank, ANZ, NAB and Westpac, as well as super funds, to invest in social and affordable housing. Now, under the new plan, the federal government's planning to spend $350 million to deliver an additional 10,000 homes, but Andrew, over 5 years. So all in all, the government's looking to provide a total of 20,000 homes, the 10,000 affordable and the others. And they're also expecting the states and territories to chip in as well. But where are we going to get those million homes? Currently, as I see it, there's no policy detail provided, and we don't even know how this initiative will be executed. Suffice it to say, I think the government wants to play a leading role in it, Andrew.
It's just political claptrap, I believe, Michael. It's just, we know there's a problem. If you're a tenant, there's a problem. It's just a way of governments trying to sound like they're addressing the problem. And aspirational target, what does that mean? Well, we know what it means. It means that we're still going to be undersupplied. We're still going to be paying 50% plus of our income in rents. And there's just the development of this have and have nots environment from those that are lucky enough to be able to own property or have a investment property, and those that don't, that are locked out of the market and can hope to put up their hands to get one of these social housing projects that are all 10,000 of them. We are millions of homes short in this country, Michael, and it is all because of the green tape and the red tape and the not in my backyard, and the messing around from our banking sector, playing ducks and drakes with particular buyer groups, creating credit squeezes, and creating what is now an emerging crisis in housing in this country.
Well, the government says it's looking for the private sector stakeholders, mainly superannuation funds, to build these extra homes. But I can't see how they're going to make it commercially attractive. I know that mum and dad property investors are accepting yields of 3% gross, when the superannuation funds, they're looking for much bigger yields, particularly they can get it in commercial properties or elsewhere. So if to get the big industry funds in, the government's going to have to subsidise them in some ways, probably in a way that they're not helping subsidise private investors at the moment, Andrew.
That's right, Michael. It's just public housing by another name, is it not? I mean, the way you get the private sector involved is you have to give them some sort of incentives, and those incentives will mean tax breaks, and tax breaks are just putting your hand into the public's pocket again. It's cloud cuckoo land stuff. It's ideological claptrap. We seem to have political parties that are locked in some sort of a time warp or some sort of a class society that they think Australia is, but it's not. It's an egalitarian society and an aspirational society. And gee whiz, politicians, can't you wake up to that and start to release that aspiration and that egalitarianism and Australian risk takers that are all out there in terms of small investors at the moment, but keep getting clobbered on the head either by through the financial sector, the banking sector, or being treated as persona non grata. And yet there are plenty of people out there that would give their eye teeth to get an property somewhere just to live in, not to invest in. And they're falling well short at the moment. As I said, private sector renters, their proportion of their income that they're paying in rent is pushing above 50%, particularly if we look at the averages in Sydney. That's not sustainable in an economy where we're seeing real wages falling by record levels. And of course, the rise in rents, which reflects that undersupply of property, was a significant factor in the latest inflation data. The aspirational target, and fingers crossed, let's hope it works, it won't even cover new demand coming through, Michael, and that's new demand from opening our borders to, again, surges of migration. We need them to fill jobs, that's for sure. But we've also got local household formation that we need to cover as well going forward. We're building around about 180,000 new homes a year at the moment. So we're really looking just for the same sort of numbers. And at the moment, we can't, with that 180,000 a year, it's not enough to satisfy new demand coming in. So we continue going backwards here. And I think, unfortunately, that's going to be the case for quite some time, because we are just locked out of being able to provide the level of new development that we need because of all the bits and pieces that stop developers and investors through the process.
Well, even if we could build them, there's a massive shortage of primary trades to build the houses, as well as materials. Yes. So to build affordable houses, making them cheaper, is not going to be easy. But Andrew, do we actually want to live in cheap housing?
No, Michael, that's the point. I thought it was interesting that, and again, this is just gobbledygook coming out. Sounds great, but when you think about it and give it more than 2 minutes attention to the soundbite, it's all rubbish. The aim is to build them in the target areas of low vacancies and high rents. That's where we're going to build them all. Well, they're middle ring and inner ring suburbs, which in Sydney, you can't get hold of houses in those areas for under $2 million. And yet these are the areas, of course, where there's the highest demand for rental properties and where there are the lowest vacancy rates. And yet these are the areas that are going to be targeted for 1 million homes in 4 years, 5 years. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. The actual constraints to new development in those middle ring suburbs, particularly, and outer ring suburbs, are all about the local barriers, to development, and that's fine. I mean, planning laws in this country are the jurisdiction of state and local governments. There's nothing the Commonwealth can do without having a referendum and change the constitution to have a more of a whole of nation effort to fix housing under supply. So we are, unfortunately, a hostage to what local communities regard as being appropriate development. And that's completely understandable. People want to maintain the characteristics of their neighbourhoods. They don't want high-rise towers in middle ring and inner ring suburbs, generally. And that's always going to be the barrier. And we're not alone here, Michael. These exact same scenarios are playing out in the United States, where it is about local political barriers to development, which are causing similar acute shortages of accommodation because of underbuilding. The solution is problematic. I don't have a solution to this, but certainly there has to be some energy from governments to push aside the sound bites and come up with something concrete. It's fine for a Labor government, of course, to be pushing towards improved public housing, but public housing is just the tip of the iceberg here. We're looking at housing millions and millions of Australians who are going to be marginalised out of the private housing market because the system's just against them now.
Well, if you think about it, with our population aiming to be 29 million by 2030, it's around 26 million now. There's going to be 3 million more Australians before the end of this decade. But the government's saying, hey, let's wait till 2024. Every year that we don't build enough houses, Andrew, there's a negative impact with more housing affordability issues and bigger shortfalls.
That's right. And of course, we do know the housing market is in an adjustment process. Booming house prices last year, extraordinary booming house prices last year, particularly in Sydney, eventually, of course, led to affordability barriers, and we saw markets easing as they do earlier this year. But of course, along came the sledgehammer of interest rate increases, which has exacerbated that downturn. And the fuel to all that has been the hysterical headlines predicting just once again, almost laughably, 20, 30, 40% falls in house prices. And that's meant that buyers and sellers have been sitting on their hands. But the interesting point is they haven't been sitting on their hands for as long as perhaps many of these doomsayers anticipated, because housing markets are certainly, particularly the Sydney market, is showing clear signs of life through spring now. And I think a lot of that is because, well, they're ignoring the nonsense that's coming out regarding doom and gloom from the usual suspects, but also they want to make sure that they can secure their property assets in a period where prices are actually lower and our economy is booming. And I thought that the latest ABS data for home loans was very interesting, because even though predictably home loan activity fell again overall in August, and we should expect that, affordability issues, higher interest rates and confidence, but we did see first home buyers back in the market, Michael. And I think that was very instructive as to the mindset of that particular group of housing aspirationals. But despite higher interest rates and all the negative claptrap that's going around, first home buyers were back in the market again in numbers, in higher numbers over August compared to July. And these are seasonally adjusted numbers, which I think reflects the fact that they want to get into the housing market ASAP, which of course is what Australians have been thinking for generations. But also they want to avoid that rental market, Michael, which is with rents going through the roof and also restricting their capacity to save. And in a booming economy, get on with life. Let's do what we know in our bones is the right thing to do, and that's to secure property while we can.
Well, apart from the housing accord and the federal budget, there were a raft of existing policies to help first homeowners that the government said they're going to continue on: the Help to Buy scheme, the regional first home buyer guarantee, the Future Fund, the Defence Home Ownership scheme. But Andrew, all these are going to increase demand, but it gets back to the problem: where are we going to get the supply?
That's right, Michael. This is what I said. The aspirational target for those million homes, it won't cover new demand coming through. And of course, that's not just migration, which has really ramped up quite quickly given from the end of lockdowns. It's not just catering for high levels of migration. It's also local household formation, which of course is about first home buyers. And we're seeing signs of those first home buyers in a market that's certainly wary, coming back in sooner rather than many expected. As I said, albeit with lower numbers, but certainly an increase on previous months. We just don't have enough houses, Michael. And I think it was interesting that you mentioned this new barrier, which I don't think is being paid as enough attention to as it should be, and that's the high cost of actual housing. I mean, builders can't build if they can't make a profit, Michael, and that's more about the standalone houses, detached dwellings, because they offer fixed price contract, whereas those that are developing high rise sell off the plan, and there is some flexibility in terms of the price outcomes, but still these are dangerous periods for builders because they don't know how building costs will continue to rise, whether they will at these extraordinary levels at the moment, and for how long. So I think that will there be a tapering off? We looked like we were going to get a tapering off in building costs over July and June. However, over August, the My Housing Market Building Cost Index increased again over that month. So it was only a short-term pause in the increase in house building costs. And of course, again, we've seen the impact of that on the inflation data that came out recently for the September quarter.
So following on from that, most of the new developments already on the drawing board having building approvals are not currently financially viable because end values don't stack up with the extra cost of building. So again, it questions how are we going to build these affordable properties? Now, it sounds like we're being very negative. We don't have a solution. The clever government doesn't have a solution. Having said that, what it shows to me is this is going to underpin the value of established properties in Australia because all new properties are going to cost a lot more, which means that it's going to drag up the value and it's going to underpin our markets, which are in due course going to turn around again just because of supply and demand.
Exactly, Michael. And the fundamental law of economics tells us that. And that's the one law that seems to still be bulletproof, given how so many mainstream and policy economists have got it so dead wrong for a number of years now in regard to what their theories are and what the actual outcomes are. We've just got to hope that interest rate policy dampens the economy to the point where we do get a lower inflation without throwing the baby out with the bathwater and creating a recession. But, that's all ahead of us now. But I think that the big focus for many Australians will be maintaining their position in this, what is still a lucky country in terms of its housing market. As I said, it seems to be our political class is completely detached from the reality of the environment. Maybe they listen to all those loudest noises that scream about housing not being affordable and ignore the fact that Australians, the vast majority of Australians, whether investors or owner-occupiers, manage their mortgage positions quite strongly. And, we still maintain very low levels of mortgage arrears and defaults. And that's because, we are a prudent country going forward and we have a robust and resilient banking sector, all four of them.
And it's also part of our DNA because maybe we should finish off by reminding people that there was 1 million new first home buyers coming into the market in the last decade, just over 1 million. Yeah. So we do want to own our own homes, don't we?
Well, we do. And unfortunately, as I said, we get perhaps government gets sucked into the property haters out there. And there are many property haters out there that have loud voices. And they're a little quieter now because they realise that the problem that's been created by all these roadblocks over the journey is, unfortunately, certainly in the shorter to medium term, I believe, insoluble.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this policy plays out. Look forward to catching up with you in a Property Insiders chat next week, Andrew.
Yes, thanks, Michael.